Hello lovely Year 10s and welcome to another lesson on Jekyll and Hyde. I've been really pleased with what I've seen from your context work from yesterday. So today is about deepening that understanding a little bit more. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of the exam, the literature exam. We're going to explore evil and then we're going to look through a little bit more context. Any other things you're doing in your free time are amazing, so please keep sending them through. I've been really impressed with your work so far. Okay, so a quick recap of the exam. Don't worry that last little bit's cut off. This is just a run through. Again, if you would like to write this down for your own peace of mind so you know what the exam is about and what you need to do, feel free. But it's available online. You don't need to write it down at this point. Probably worth clarifying, this is literature today, so you need to be doing it from the middle of your books. So, paper 1 is Shakespeare in a 19th century novel. We are doing Macbeth, and as you know, we're doing Jekyll and Hyde for our 19th century text. Secondly, for modern text and poetry, it's an Inspector Calls, and then we do the power and conflict section of poetry. That is what the exam is made up of. So 2 papers for GCSE literature, 1 exam grade overall. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. Jekyll and Hyde is a fantastic text. It's really interesting in the way it explores human psychology and this idea of duality, particularly given the time in which it was written. So, before we dive right back into context, I would like you to consider, in your opinion, is there such thing as pure evil? Is anyone born evil, or do they become evil? It's that argument of nature versus nurture. So have a little think, write down your ideas in your books, and I would pause the tape here. Okay, I'm now going to show you a series of statements. What I would like you to do once I finished reading them is consider which statement you agree with the most, which statement you agree with the least, and I would like you to write down your responses, so the statements, and justify why you have those opinions. So firstly, our nature is dependent on where and how we were brought up. Everyone has a good and an evil side of their personality. Everything we do is for our own benefit. You can never truly know another person. Cities make violence and crime more likely. People should not suppress their violent or darker impulses. Civilization is just a disguise for man's primal instincts. Everyone has it in them to kill someone else. And keeping a secret is never beneficial. It seems out of character for me to only do 9 rather than 10, so bear with. Oh Jesus, I can't go back. What I'm going to ask you to do, because I'm that good at videos, is just skip back like 10 seconds until you can see all the statements, because it won't let me go back for some hideous reason. So which one do you agree with the most, which one do you agree with the least, and why? And then pause it once you're doing it and come back and we'll do this slide. Sorry, I'm a technological disaster. Okay, hopefully you've done that task. So a little bit more about context to add from what you already did yesterday. So we know why context is so important. We know that it's gonna clarify a lot of things. It's gonna deepen our understanding of the text if we know what is happening socially, politically, at the time in which it was written. It affects the language, it might affect the plot, it will definitely affect the characters. So that is why context is so important. And it's actually part of the success criteria that the examiners look for. That's your AO3, your context. Don't need to write this down. So, Robert Louis Stevenson is our author. He's an incredibly interesting man. Rumour has it that he actually wrote this book whilst he was off his face on drugs. But that's just something historians like to bandy about. There's no definitive evidence for this. So, he was born in Edinburgh in 1850. His father was an engineer, his mother came from a family of lawyers, so we know that Stevenson came from quite a respectable background. They conformed to this strict code of the Victorian middle classes. He was ill a lot as a child, and he was looked after by a nurse who was a fundamentalist Christian, so She basically convinced him that there was good and there was evil and there was nothing in between. So that whole binary idea of good and evil, and that really affected him as a child, along with a lot of other things growing up. And she clearly indoctrinated him quite a bit with these ideas, because he often had nightmares about hell. Equally, it's worth noting that Edinburgh had two sides as well. We often see the idea of London having two sides depicted in things like Oliver Twist. So like the very public Victorian gentleman versus the private underclass, if you will. And Edinburgh was very much like that as well. And whilst at university, Stevenson himself led a bit of a double life. So he'd be this academic scholar, but then he'd maybe go to gin bars or gambling in the evening. So a lot of this text, a main theme is this idea of duality. And as I go through some more context, you will see how this links into absolutely everything that we talk about. So I've highlighted very helpfully and very neatly the things that you might want to write down. Please don't write it all. It will take you forever and it's not necessary. But do write down the key things. Bullet points are absolutely fine at this point. So pause it here, jot down what you need to, and then we'll carry on. Okay. So we know a little bit about the Victorian era, known as Hypocrisy and Fears of a Civilised Society. These are just some fun images that give you an idea. Have a little look at them, have a little think about them, consider what life was like then. Do not write stuff down. When you're ready, move on. Okay, so this idea of a Victorian gentleman was central. So a very important figure in Victorian society. And being middle class or upper middle class was part of being a gentleman. They were from the upper classes, the upper echelons of Victorian society. Now, gentlemen were expected to have strong morals, be kind, particularly towards poorer people. However, we know in reality that wasn't really the case, and again, it's that idea of duality, so presenting yourself as this very morally correct, kind character, but actually not really caring about the poor and probably being quite judgmental about them. So again, jot down the key things very quickly, and then we'll move on. Okay, linked to this is this obsession with reputation. It was all about reputation. That was the most important thing to a man. Reputation was everything. And there was a lot of blackmail in Victorian society. So people being like, well, I'll publicise that you're seeing a mistress, or I'll say I saw you at a gin den, or whatever it might have been, because people valued it so highly. Equally, Victorian gentlemen were expected to keep their emotions strictly under control. So they certainly weren't emotive on the outside. That kind of idea of a British stiff upper lip. But they're meant to hide their desires for things like alcohol, gambling, sex. They weren't meant to experience any sort of emotions or desires. And so because of that, in public, they were quite snobby about these disreputable places like bars or whatever else. But really, they'd kind of go into the depths of a city at night and frequent these places. And that's how they ended up getting blackmailed. And they would spend a huge amount of money paying people to keep quiet for them, because that idea of reputation was so central to a Victorian gentleman. So pause it again, write down some key things, and then carry on when you're ready. Okay, so we've already spoken about the importance of being a gentleman and attitudes towards the working classes. And really, people were very snobbish. They weren't particularly kind. A lot of people thought that the working classes kind of carried disease, and it was as a result of their own filth, rather than because of the oppressive societal kind of structures that were in place. So you've got that idea again of the two sides of the city. So upper class versus working class, but they overlapped, because where the Victorian gentlemen ended up wanting to go, like brothels, was obviously in the dodgier parts of the city. So those things collided, those worlds collided frequently. Write stuff down if you need to. Okay, so you've probably learned loads about the Industrial Revolution, probably did it in primary school, but just as a recap, as it was going on, it meant a lot of people left the country, migrated to the city, and there just wasn't enough room to live. So you'd have like 4 families living in one little terrace house. It was awful, poor hygiene. They were slums. Soho was a really dodgy area then, quite fashionable now, she says, as an ageing teacher. And we know all about the smog in Victorian London, that smoke and that pollution. It was a dingy place to live. You probably know this stuff already, so you don't need to write it down, but if you would like to, feel free. Okay, the other thing that's really important in Victorian society is that everyone was Christian. Everyone went to church, so it's not like now where you can be considered quite a spiritual person without going to church. If you didn't go to church on a Sunday, people would be judging you. Now, in 1859, this book was published in 1886, my bad. So in 1859, Darwin published The Origin of Species, which explored the idea of evolution. And this freaked people out because, according to the Bible, none of that science stuff can be true. So there was this real conflict between science and religion. And I'd like you to take a bit of time to pick one of the tasks on the slide to complete. So the first one is, what does primitive mean? Look it up, write it down in your own words. Secondly, how does it contradict religious attitudes? So do a little bit of research. And finally, what impact do you think Darwin had on Victorian society? And if you'd like to look into that into a bit more detail, there's some excellent articles available online. The British Library is particularly good for Jekyll and Hyde stuff at the moment, so feel free to have a look. So pick which one you're going to do, pause the video, and press play when you're ready. Okay, I've been talking a lot about duality or dual identity. Now, this whole Jack the Ripper thing was actually 2 years after this book was published, but it heightened the anxieties. This book was really controversial when it came out, and this idea of someone in the streets of London like killing women and not being caught was astounding. And because people were so obsessed with this idea of duality, a lot of people thought that actually maybe Jack the Ripper was someone linked to royalty, maybe they were a Victorian gentleman, and people didn't quite know where they stood, so it really freaked them out. I mean, there's a question there, you don't have to answer it, but it's just quite interesting how it plays into those Victorian anxieties at the time. Okay, so I've summarised duality in the Victorian era here. We've covered a lot of it. If you think it would be helpful, remember these are going to be your revision notes for Year 11 too. I would maybe pick between 3 and 5 for each side, whichever ones you think are most pertinent, and just write them down in a table. It's showing the kind of positives and negatives of Victorian society, and how that affected people's reading of the book, like the first readers of this book, how this world affected their understanding when they read it. I'm pretty sure, actually, Stevenson's wife burnt the first one he wrote, and I think he had to rewrite it. I need to check that. So, pause it here, between 3 and 5 on each side, and then we shall continue. Okay, penultimate slide, I do believe. I'd like you to think about human psychology, because why not bring that into English? I would like you to respond to just one of these questions. Sorry, I keep fidgeting. So, do humans have a drive towards self-destruction? So, doing things that we know are bad, like me eating copious amounts of pizza, even though I know I shouldn't, and probably more serious stuff as well. So, do we have a drive towards self-destruction? Where is destructive behaviour evident today? Or, how do individuals or society deal with their destructive impulses? What do we do to deal with it when we want to do something that we know we shouldn't? Quite in-depth questions to explore, so pick one and make sure you justify your ideas. Pause it here. Okay, final thoughts for today. So, write me 3 sentences about how Victorian society is uncertain. Think about the changes that society was facing. Then, select 3 words from your 3 sentences that you believe are the most important. Probably should be some punctuation there, but make sure you explain your reasons. And finally, select the most important word and write it down. Why is that word most significant in your opinion? So why is that word to you the epitome of Victorian society? Again, I'm not looking for particular answers here. It's just really interesting to know your thoughts, particularly as you've kind of done some work on context yesterday and now you're consolidating it today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed your first experience of my video. As you can tell, I'm as awkward virtually as I am in real life, and I really look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Goodbye.